Let's begin. First, you probably think dinosaurs are one big category of giant extinct reptiles that all died out. You believe birds are a totally separate group that showed up later and politely replaced them. Let's test that from the ground up. In 1842, a British anatomist named Richard Owen looked at a pile of huge fossil bones and coined the word dinosaur. It literally means terrible lizard. Terrible lizard was never a great name. It was a marketing label for a few celebrity skeletons before anyone knew how they were actually related. Modern paleontologists do not sort animals by poster appeal. They sort them by shared ancestry, the same way you would sort a family reunion. And when you build that family tree with new fossils and DNA from living animals, one branch keeps landing inside the dinosaur group, no matter how many times you rerun the analysis. That branch is birds, not cousins, not successors. Birds are theropod dinosaurs, the same lineage as Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus, still alive and pooping on your car. In 1986, the paleontologist Jacques Gauthier named the group Maniraptora and showed formally that birds nest deep inside theropod dinosaurs. The fossils had been screaming this for years. Science finally put it on the record. Here is the fact: dinosaurs are not entirely extinct. One major lineage survived the mass extinction. Right now, it is flying over your head and pecking at sidewalks and singing at dawn. Everything else in this video is about the ones stuck in rock. Second, you probably think every dinosaur was enormous. You picture a world where even the runts were the size of a minivan. Wrong. Let's build this from one measurement. Argentinosaurus could weigh as much as a dozen elephants. It is one of the largest land animals that ever lived. Now put that next to Compsognathus, a dinosaur from the Jurassic that was about the size of a chicken. When Compsognathus was named in 1859 from a skeleton in Germany, it was one of the smallest dinosaurs anyone had ever seen. Since then, paleontologists have found many more species in that size range: Microraptor, Parvicursor, Mehicala, names you will never see on a lunchbox because Hollywood only budgets for teeth. Here is the test that matters. Count the species, not the blockbuster cast. Sauropods and tyrannosaurs were real, but they were the extreme end of a spectrum. Most dinosaur species were closer to turkey size than to bus size. Here is the fact: the dinosaur world was not a uniform parade of giants. It was a crowded ecosystem of small and medium animals, with a few record-breaking outliers that hijacked your imagination. Third, you probably think dinosaurs were cold-blooded and sluggish, like oversized lizards sunbathing until lunch. Almost, but not quite. Here is the principle first. Cold-blooded animals tend to grow slowly and leave a particular signature inside their bones, like tree rings that whisper how fast the animal was running its body. When paleontologists slice dinosaur bones and look under a microscope, many species show fast growth bands that look far more like birds and mammals than like modern reptiles. Jack Horner and other researchers spent decades reading those growth rings in everything from T-Rex down to juveniles, and the fast growth pattern kept showing up. Then, in 1969, a paleontologist named John Ostrom studied a predator called Deinonychus and noticed something that did not fit the slow lizard story at all. The skeleton was light and stiff-tailed and built like a runner. The claws were weapons on a body that looked engineered for speed and coordinated attack. Ostrom argued that Deinonychus lived more like an active bird than like a sunbathing crocodile, and that single paper helped reopen the entire metabolism debate. Here is the fact: many dinosaurs were not sluggish reptiles stuffed into giant bodies. They were active animals with metabolisms closer to birds than to lizards. Some hunted in coordinated groups fast enough to make the slow dinosaur story look embarrassing. Fourth, you probably think dinosaurs looked like the green, scaly monsters from old movies, dragging their tails and standing like bloated lizards. That image is decades out of date. Here is the puzzle that forces this conclusion. A skeleton is only half the story. Ligaments and cartilage tell you how the spine actually carried the body. For most of the 20th century, museum skeletons mounted T-Rex and Apatosaurus with tails slumped on the ground, and spines pitched forward like a kangaroo that gave up. That posture was not based on careful biology. It was based on habit and heavy plaster, and the assumption that dinosaurs were just big lizards with good PR. Starting in the 1970s and 1980s, paleontologists including Robert Bakker pushed museums to remount skeletons with tails held horizontal and hips balanced like birds. The difference is not cosmetic. It changes how fast the animal could move and how it breathed and how much weight the legs actually carried. Walk into a modern museum today, and you are often seeing a second-generation mount, which is a polite way of saying the childhood version was wrong. Here is the fact. The classic tail-dragging dinosaur silhouette is not how these animals were built to stand. They carried their bodies bird upright, and many of the mounts you grew up with were simply assembled in the wrong pose. Fifth, you probably think feathers belong only to birds and that dinosaurs were covered in plain scales from head to tail. There is not a version of that story that survives the fossils. Let's build this from nothing. A feather is not magic bird tissue. At the microscopic level, it is a structured filament, and nature can produce that filament in more than one group. In 1996, researchers in China described a small theropod called Sinosauropteryx preserved with a dark fringe of filaments along its back. It was not a bird. It was a small running dinosaur wearing a coat of simple feather-like structures millions of years before any true bird existed. After that discovery, the floodgates opened. Caudipteryx, Bapiosaurus, Dilong, fossil after fossil showed filaments and fluff and full feathers on non-bird dinosaurs. In 2012, Su Xing and colleagues described Yutyrannus. It was a tyrannosaur relative roughly the size of a bus, and it too was covered in feathers. So the Hollywood version of a naked, scaly giant tyrannosaur is not the safe default anymore. For many theropods, the default is closer to a giant, angry ostrich. Here is the fact. Feathers and feather-like filaments were not a bird invention. They spread through many dinosaur lineages long before flight. They were used for display and warmth and brooding eggs. The scaly monster in your head is the outdated director's cut. Sixth, you probably think Tyrannosaurus rex was the definitive dinosaur, the biggest and most important predator that ever lived. It was not, and the fossils caught it red-handed. T-Rex was real, and it was spectacular. But spectacular is not the same as representative. If you want sheer mass, the sauropods win before the conversation even starts. Argentinosaurus and Patagodoton were herbivores that dwarf T-Rex the way a building dwarfs a person. If you want the largest predatory dinosaur ever found, the title often goes to Spinosaurus. It was a sail-backed hunter that outweighed T-Rex. New tail fossils described in 2020 suggest it spent much of its life in the water. That 2020 study led by Nizar Ibrahim showed a paddle-shaped tail built for swimming, and it forced paleontologists to redraw what the biggest carnivorous dinosaur even looked like. And T-Rex itself only lived in one slice of time. That was the very end of the Cretaceous in western North America for roughly 2 million years. Non-avian dinosaurs as a group lasted more than 160 million years. T-Rex was a late cameo, not the main character of the whole era. Here is the fact. T-Rex was one species in one window of time, not the blueprint for all dinosaurs. The largest animals were often herbivores. The largest predators looked different depending on the continent, and the pop culture king was a brief finale, not the whole show. Seventh, you probably think mammals spent the age of dinosaurs as tiny shrew-like creatures hiding in burrows until the asteroid finally gave them a shot. Not quite. Early mammals were smaller than most dinosaurs, yes, but small does not mean helpless. In 2005, paleontologists led by Ye Yaming who described Repenomamus from China. It was a Cretaceous mammal, badger-sized, and far bigger than the cartoon shrew in your head. Inside one Repenomamus fossil, they found the bones of a juvenile Psittacosaurus in its stomach. Read that again. A mammal ate a baby dinosaur, not the other way around. Mammals and dinosaurs shared the planet for more than 100 million years. Mammals diversified into burrowers and climbers and swimmers and predators long before any impact winter. The asteroid changed who got the spotlight, but it did not introduce mammals to the world. They were already there, and some were dangerous. Here is the fact. Mammals were not just dinosaur side characters waiting in the green room. They coexisted and competed, and in at least one documented case, they turned the predator-prey story upside down. Eighth, you probably think the dinosaurs all died on one bad day when a single asteroid hit Earth and wiped them out instantly. The truth is messier, and scientists have been arguing about the mess for decades. Here is the principle first. Extinction is a process, not a switch. In 1980, the physicist Luis Alvarez and his son Walter found a thin layer of iridium in rock around the world, a metal rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids. That layer sits right at the boundary between the Cretaceous and the Paleogene, exactly where non-avian dinosaurs vanish from the fossil record. Later work identified the Chicxulub crater off Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula as the smoking gun, an impact so large it threw debris into the atmosphere and darkened the sky. But the crater tells you the blow landed. It does not tell you every species died in the same hour. Some animals died in the blast zone within minutes. Others starved as plants failed for seasons. Oceans acidified. Food webs collapsed over years and decades. And dinosaur diversity was already under pressure before the impact. Huge volcanic eruptions in India, called the Deccan Traps, were pumping gas into the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands of years. Paleontologists still debate how much each catastrophe contributed, but they agree on one thing. The end was not a single tidy Tuesday. Here is the fact. The dinosaur extinction was a global crisis that unfolded across time, not one instant kill switch. The asteroid was the final hammer, but the nail had been bending for a long while, and one lineage of small feathered dinosaurs slipped through and became the birds you see today. Ninth, you probably think scientists could clone a dinosaur if they found the right mosquito in amber, the way Jurassic Park promised. Wrong. Let's test that idea from the ground up. Cloning needs intact DNA, the long molecule that stores an organism's genetic instructions. DNA is not immortal. It breaks apart with heat and water and time. In 2012, a team led by Morten Alentoft and Michael Bunce measured how fast DNA decays in real fossils, using bones from extinct moa birds buried in New Zealand. They calculated a half-life for DNA of about 521 years at typical burial temperatures, around 13 degrees Celsius. That means every few centuries, half of the readable code is gone. After millions of years, there should be nothing left to read. The youngest non-avian dinosaur fossils are more than 66 million years old. There is no scientific pathway from that age to a complete genome. Amber preserves insects beautifully. It does not preserve dinosaur blood with intact chromosomes. That was always a movie trick. Here is the fact. No one has recovered usable dinosaur DNA, and the chemistry of decay makes Jurassic Park-style cloning impossible with today's science. We can rebuild the shape of dinosaurs from bone. We cannot rebuild them from code. Your childhood dream is safe because physics said no. 10th, and this is the one that should really get you. You probably think birds only resemble dinosaurs in a vague, poetic way, like saying a bat resembles a person because both have bones. Not here. Not in your kitchen. Wrong. We already said birds are dinosaurs, but here is the part nobody feels in their bones. That is not a metaphor, and it is not rounding up. A chicken is a theropod dinosaur the same way you are a primate. The nesting is exact. Every trait paleontologists use to define theropods shows up in birds. That includes the hip structure, and the hole in the skull, and the ankle geometry, and the wishbone, and even the way eggs are laid. Which means the most common dinosaur on Earth today is not in a museum. It is on your dinner table. When you eat poultry, you are eating dinosaur. When pigeons land on a statue, they are theropods perching on stone theropods. Your brain splits them because one group is familiar and safe, and the other is fossilized and extinct, but biology does not care about the mental fence you built in 3rd grade. Paleontologists did not demote birds to make dinosaurs cooler. They realized the family tree had been drawn with a fence that never existed. Here is the fact. You have already seen living dinosaurs today, and you may have eaten one this week. The terrible lizards never fully left. We just renamed the survivors birds and stopped counting them because it freaked people out. So here is where all of this leaves you. Dinosaurs are not fully extinct. Most were not giants. Many were fast and active. They stood like birds, not like dragging lizards. Feathers spread far beyond flight. T-Rex was a late cameo, not the whole era. Mammals sometimes bit back. The extinction was a catastrophe stretched across time. The DNA is gone forever, and the survivors were birds all along. Almost everything you assumed about dinosaurs turns out to be wrong. These were the most iconic animals Earth ever produced, and paleontology proved it fossil by fossil. The strangest part is not that they had feathers, or that an asteroid ended their world. The strangest part is that you never thought of the pigeon outside your window as a dinosaur at all.